Hello, hello. Is it Jumpsy?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi. Nice to meet you. Let me switch on my video. Hi.
We'll get started soon. Sometimes people join late.
Yeah, sure, sure.
A lot of people might not join today because of the member summit that's happening in Tahoe. So I
Okay.
know a couple of folks are there attending. So it might be a lighter meeting today.
Okay. Yeah. I'm very new, pretty new to this SLSA team. I mean, this Open OSSF team. Recently, I joined OpenSSF, and then yesterday I attended one meeting with Mark and the team
Yes,
for,
specification.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for the specification. So I'm somehow interested in that topic, and I thought, okay, I'll explore further, and then let's see how we can contribute in future.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah,
I'm trying to get the meeting notes here for you. If you can sign in. Okay. And I will sign in myself too. And okay. Let me share my screen real quick. Let me do a portion of my screen. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, that works. So yeah, if you can just sign in, and then as people will join, we'll continue the
okay.
discussion. But since you are a new friend, please, you already mentioned that you joined the specification call yesterday. So,
Yeah,
what brings you to Salsa?
yeah. Recently, I got the opportunity to present what's new in CI/CD topic for the next 22 event in Google, and there I was presented about that topic, and then salsa was one of the uh, topic under that. So
Mhm.
then I learned about salsa. I explored the SLSA.dev site, and then I'm basically a like I do have around 4 years of experience core into the DevOps part.
Okay.
So I worked in Azure DevOps, Jenkins, Azure, TeamCity, and GitLab and GitHub as well. So then I like was fond of that topic, and then I was really happy to see that how we have categorized into 4 levels, and then the provenance information generation and usage that for the deployment. Those topic I was like much interested, and
Mhm.
while exploring, I found this OpenSSF like group, working group. Then I thought,
Mhm.
okay, let me join and then
Yeah.
get more information. That.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael. Yeah.
Hi. Well, thank you for that intro and welcome. So Mike Lieberman actually is one of the steering committee members for SOSA. So he is very much been around for a while. I've been around since this year, so I'm relatively new. Um, I
Okay.
guess I won't be new come time next year, but but relatively new.
Yeah.
You're voting after this meeting. I did my pre-voting. But yeah, if you can sign in, Jumpsy.
Yeah, I'll do
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes what we'll do is we'll try to share. It's optional. We try to share something about ourselves when we sign in. I put a little, tongue sticking out. I already voted because I'm not waiting in line for just like Mike is going to be waiting in line pretty soon here for voting. I try to do things early. I don't like waiting in line. I'm just poking fun at the folks that will have to wait in line to vote today for the midterms.
Yep.
Hi, Laura. Welcome. Is this your
Hi.
first time in this meeting, Laura?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so
Um, I can
I will
share that.
consider you a new friend then.
Oh, thanks. Same. I just was trying to heat up soup and quickly before this meeting, and of course, it was a glass jar of soup, and it just shattered all over the kitchen. So that's
I'm sorry.
yeah, and I'd like, but they made the kids they're a little bit older, so they got the broom and the dustpan, and they got shoes on, and they're helping. I picked up most of the glass, but they're helping scoop it. I'm like, oh my gosh, can you guys please? I know. I gotta go.
Well, at least we have helpers. I probably would have left it there until like after work.
Well,
So
the
I would have
dog,
probably
well, my
dried.
dog would have tried to eat it with shards of glass, and then I'd be at the vet. So
okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Anyway,
Okay. So for Jumpsy and Laura, right? So for the positioning group, what we're trying to do is trying to, you know, educate, evangelize, you know, what salsa is, how it can help. We were doing some earlier efforts on mapping to the different kind of frameworks. We kind of put that on pause for a little bit because we wanted to do it in an automated fashion. So right now what we're doing is we're focusing on trying to put out a few blogs. And sorry if you can hear background noise. And so the blog that we're working on right now, it's called a developer blog of, you know, why a developer cares about salsa. And we're focusing on level 1 and level 2. This session today is called a working session. And so working session, I should put that in here. And so whenever we have things to do, if we don't have time to sync up afterwards, like, you know, in between meetings, we can use this time. And really, it helps me focus because, you know, this is not my day job. I know for some people, open source is all they do, but this at least helps me try to focus at least an hour to get proceed with the agenda or trying to get further along. And then on the off weeks, then we have the normal positioning session where, you know, pretty much anything's up for grabs. So this is really an optional session. But we always welcome people to join and collaborate. And so I'm going to put this, and do you have any topics that maybe you want to discuss before we go into trying to finish up the developer blog? No? Mike?
I'm still.
Go ahead, Laura. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I'm still in catch-up mode on, but I did present the concept of the end-to-end software supply chain framework that it isn't just exclusively salsa as something that is new for to work on this quarter at our security industry coordination QBR. So I'm really looking forward to contributing and seeing where best we can fit.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Laura. Mike, Jumpsy, do you have any topics? No. Okay.
No topic from my side.
Okay.
As I told, like I'm pretty new and just wanted to explore things happening in these meetings, and then we'll slowly understand the things and then catch up and then start contributing towards this. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, then I put in the chat the link to this document. Michelle joined last week, and she actually did a really good job of doing like an intro. Basically, for the part 1, the intent of the blog is just, you know, how salsa helps, right? Very light, not too prescriptive, so that we can get, you know, a developer / I think we also mentioned product manager to buy in to the concept of salsa, right? And so she did a really good job of trying to make the analogy and linking back to the DevSecOps manifesto, like why are we actually doing this? Why should they care? And so feel free to read through that. I think this part is pretty golden right now. I also think most of these two, the why should software developers and product managers consider salsa, I think this is pretty good. There was a clarity that these are developer specific, and I wasn't sure quite how to word that, right? Because it just says salsa level 1 to 2, but it doesn't say that it's what we are focusing on here in particular is developer specific, and maybe it's enough to say we're doing it up here instead. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that aspect.
Could you please share the link again? Somehow the chat got cleared in my side.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I actually clicked on the link again by accident. Here you go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So thoughts from Laura or Mike on, is this clear enough? Do we need to add clarity that these are developer specific?
I would say I was looking for something that it's been a couple of months since I had to add additional resources to something similar about explaining the security requirements to a software developer, because we get oftentimes the response that they don't work in security, and so, like, you know, not all of them, right? Just occasional, like, I don't work in security and security is not my job. So yeah, I actually took some time to and it may take me a few minutes to find the reference where it states that like security is software is part of the software development lifecycle. So maybe just something like that ties it together to say, this is why you should care, and it's not just because we said so, but because
yeah. So yeah, definitely then check this part that Michelle contributed to what you have seen success, because Michelle mentioned that she's seen success in this type of messaging to developers. And so if there's something missing or something maybe we can enhance, by all means, we can add to it. And so I think this would be a good section for you to take a look at once you do find that reference that you're trying to look for. So by SLSA levels, there's this what's not covered by SLSA levels. So we want to make sure that we are putting SLSA in the right, I guess, position, right? Like, it's not going to fix all your problems. Right? And so I think this is why we added the what is not covered by SLSA. Yeah. But I do, go ahead.
Yeah.
But I am curious about if we should add something like, for these things that we don't cover, there are XYZ OpenSSF projects that do cover them. Should we incorporate something like that?
Just one thing that I would like to add here, like there are already some security specification, like NIST security specification and all, which more detailed about the different security guidelines and all. And SLSA is actually looks like giving a lighter version of that. So if we were able to correlate, then people will be able to understand, like those who know that NIST or some other security standards, they will be able to understand where SLSA placed in the security guidelines part.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we should reference back to the SSDF blog that we wrote a while ago. I'm thinking about it.
So I think also one thing that we can maybe even be a bit stronger on is just like making it very clear here, because I know, you know, I come from that dev world that then transferred more into security, so I understand where a lot of folks are coming from. And so there's like two things. One is like SLSA is not like, it's not an application security framework, right? It's not in trying to tell you how to prevent stuff like, you know, inadvertently introducing a SQL injection attack, you know, vulnerability or something like that. It's, you know, SLSA is focused on essentially saying, is what I built like if I say I pulled down this code and these dependencies and I built that thing, am I lying to you? Or is that like accurate? That's kind of where it comes in. And so just to be clear, like I think that there's elements of some of the OWASP stuff, some of the SSDF stuff that do sort of skirt both of the, like do sort of go skirt both of those lines, right? Like they kind of hit both, you know, the provenance and integrity piece, as well as, you know, giving guidelines on just generally like how you should be, you know, writing your application to be secure. SLSA says, hey, no, like we're not that. We want to make sure that we're very focused around just purely the you know, the supply chain piece. So the provenance, making sure that, hey, I have some code, maybe I have some dependencies, and then that ends up in production at some point, you know, like, and yeah, is everything in there being tracked in a good way, and so on and so forth, such that I can trust it. I think that's one thing. The other thing I think that I've also found a lot of success in, having been on the other side of being a developer, is like being a developer being told, hey, you need to do the security stuff, is the earlier on in the process it's pushed to me, the better, right? Because then I don't have to worry about, like the worry is always, which has happened to me multiple times, is you're about to go ready for production and somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, oh, that thing you've included, that's never going to be approved. And you're like, well, why did nobody tell me? What could I have done to know that this security thing was something I should have known about, and something that I should have been aware of and been working to fix or whatever? Right? Because for the most part, developers just want to, you know, they want to do their jobs and they want to go home at a reasonable hour. And yeah, so that's kind of, I think, when I think about like what developers are interested in, like why they should care about this sort of thing, is like, hey, this helps you out with all of these pieces. It helps you out with making sure that, hey, you don't inadvertently introduce something that is gonna, you know, hurt yourself, your organization, your team, etc., as well as just sort of making sure that that's, you know, more straightforward and something that helps you go home at a reasonable time.
Yeah. I do like that use case about, you know, right before production push, something goes wrong. I think that would resonate, and I'm wondering, I'll go into this part here in a second, but I think I'm going to add that as a use case right here, and I'm going to actually add it as use case 3, because I think use case 3 would be stronger than 4. Like use case 1 and 2, they're okay, but I can build upon the story of, okay, developer does this, but you know, this doesn't catch it. So then use case 3 comes along, right? So just kind of building on different things that could happen. Okay.
Yeah, and I think one thing to just add in there, like as literal things that have happened to me, right, is, so I used to work at banks a lot, and there was a gating process, and usually the problem was that security was usually a gating process right near production. And that sort of gating process led to a lot of inefficiencies, because sometimes, you know, a security design kind of question was still being addressed right before you're ready to go to production, when you would expect that to sort of be handled significantly earlier on, so that you have that like quick feedback loop of like, oh, we have this idea. Actually, that's never going to pass policy, so we should just, you know, ignore it. Whereas, you know, the thing that has happened to us, or, you know, myself and a lot of folks who work at very large enterprises, is you get told that, you know, right before production.
Okay. Against policy, feature, not features. What word did you use? You said not a, it wasn't an idea that then got shut down. It was,
yeah, like, so designs, so like security designs, like like if, and this is something that in some of that diagram that you had earlier on, Melba, with like the holistic SDLC thing. And it's something that also we've been, we showed off a little bit at KubeCon, is that idea of, security is often, like, security is in each stage of the SDLC. And right now, people are way too focused on like the end stage of implementation, right? That end stage of implementation is where they push a lot of that security, and it's more of an organizational problem more than necessarily a developer problem. But developers should care about it, because by pushing all of that security to where it needs to be, like, hey, you should be funding security, as part of planning, and you should be, getting that ready, and then as part of like analysis or your design phase or whatever you want to call it, all of these things should get done, which then makes everything else much simpler, so you don't get surprised, right before production, or
that makes sense.
Whatever.
There's also it wasn't the exact source that I was looking for, but it's been shared before, is the application of root cause analysis kind of ties into that too. It's like how you could save time and money and developer hours, having something like SLSA that help guide you through like the software testing piece of it. So there's that aspect of that. We've talked about it. It's been a while. The article itself is really old, but one of our tech leads shared it, and so maybe that's something we could incorporate into here as well as a part of testing.
If you can add it as a comment with a link, that would be good. And then we can try to figure out how to bring it in.
I have one point to add, like in the session where what is not SLSA, can we also mention like it's not a SAST or a DAST tool, kind of static analysis tool, or a DAST that we can also put. Now I'm wondering more and more.
Here, let me show you something really quickly. I was trying to do this with Jay and Isaac. I didn't finish, right? But we were trying to say, okay, what is SLSA versus what's not SLSA, right? So SLSA build, we didn't go into the levels, right? But the dark green is, SLSA build. The light green is SLSA source. But you see the blues is, we called it the S2C2F. Open source approval, security check, compliance check, vulnerability remediation. But that's not SLSA. So I'm wondering if something like this could help, or if is it just going to complicate things?
So I do like the general thing going on here. I'm just wondering how we can make it a little bit clearer. Because I think like a simplified version of something like this would make it a bit clearer. And then the thing I'm reminded of a little bit is so this helps out with the sort of like trying to have folks understand kind of like how SLSA fits in, right? Where where SLSA is very much focused right now, at least, on the source to artifact kind of stuff. And then separately, I know one of the things that we had talked about is potentially on like a V2, we probably want to also include like maybe even go all the way back to developer, right? So developer writing source, right? And helping protect that and helping sort of help out there. And then potentially even doing something like not just till artifact, but all the way into production, something like that. So that's something I know that we've talked about like eventually hitting, but right now we want to make sure that like the big piece that's missing, it has been the build piece and the provenance from like source to that, which I think is super important. And then I think separately, the other thing that I know Isaac did, which I really liked, is those 4 levels. And I can reshare that
Yeah.
diagram real
He
quickly.
hasn't posted that, has he?
So we have it up on the Guac page.
Okay.
So
if you can give me a link.
yeah, give me 1 second.
Sure.
Here, you could just that image there from GitHub.
Yep. Okay.
And so that image, like what I like there is you have sort of, you're talking about the end-to-end sort of thing. And this is sort of saying, what are the layers to kind of get to supply chain security, right? Where the trust foundation is just like, you want to make sure that you're assigning identities to things. And then the software attestations is where SLSA fits,
Yep.
which is, hey, you are actually generating these attestations, you're doing the right thing from a security perspective, and yada yada, to then feed into the other tools and you know, to actually solve the problems.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Is Guac is part of SLSA, right? Not SLSA, OpenSSF, right?
Currently, no.
No?
Right now it's just a Google and Kusari,
Got it.
and a few other folks who we've been doing stuff with.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I think I remember Brandon in there.
I have a question, little bit out of the thing, like, you know, this SLSA, like currently is mentioning about the application build and deployment scenarios and securing that part, right? So when it comes to infrastructure as code, now that is also software part in a similar ways. So in that case, are we, for example, considering the Terraform or any IAC code development? Are we considering SLSA standard to incorporate infrastructure provisioning, build and deployment, securing infrastructure build and deployment as well?
So probably like not from the perspective of like actual, like, hey, are we securing the deployment of this thing? SLSA would be consumed by those things to sort of say, is my stuff SLSA compliant because I have a policy that all applications must be SLSA compliant. So if that's the case, then I'm going to let that get deployed. Now, separately, SLSA is still viable for infrastructure as code artifacts. So if you say, hey, I have a bundle of Ansible code or Terraform or Kubernetes bundles, there is, you know, you can say, hey, this was generated, you know, because like I know a lot of the configuration gets generated, right? Like, you know, you might have the actual sort of YAML files themselves might be just sort of just source code, but you might have folks like saying, hey, based on this, this, and this, here's a bunch of configuration that gets generated by some sort of process. That sort of thing could also go through the SLSA process to say that this set of infrastructure code is SLSA compliant. But as far as like actually securing an artifact getting deployed out, that's something that's kind of like outside of the scope of SLSA, but the intention is, and Google calls it binary authorization, a bunch of other folks call it a bunch of different other things, but the idea of like saying, hey, I have a policy and only things that meet that policy are allowed to go to get deployed.
Yeah. So what I feel, yeah, that's good. So just wanted to consider the use case where when we write IAC codes like Terraform, we do have also vulnerability check like we do in applications. Say, for example, for application, we use tools like SonarQube or checkmarks kind of tool, which will do the vulnerability analysis of the application code. Similar to that, Terraform also have tools like Checkovi, TFSec, which will do the vulnerability check of the Terraform code. It's again, like you mentioned, Michael, like it's happening in the left part of the development lifecycle. So, so SLSA, whether, I mean, my question or my doubt was like whether this process is also in line with the SLSA level standard. Can we, for example, can I say an infrastructure provisioning pipeline, like CI/CD is now applicable for Terraform also. So now can I say a statement like my CI/CD pipeline for infrastructure provisioning using Terraform is SLSA 3 compliant?
I would think that's part of the build certification, right, Mike? Or am I misunderstanding?
Yeah,
Well,
so level 2 or level 3, yeah, like that. So can you
yeah.
specify?
So on that front, so SLSA itself is So the way to think of it is SLSA is a way to sort of guarantee that you ran those security steps. So the idea behind it is SLSA itself largely just says you should have a secure pipeline, but we're not going to tell you what that is because everybody's going to have different things. And, like if you're running an air-gapped military grade environment, it's going to look very different than if Mike is, updating his blog, right? So there's going to be a very big difference there. So all the way. So with that said, though, one of the things that we've been doing, internally at Kusari with our SLSA stuff has been, we have a way of saying in the SLSA, we can see that like you ran, like we have records of you running, certain security scans, generating of SBOMs and so on. Whereas before, like the problem was you might be running a security scan, a Sonar Cube, Black Duck, Veracode, whatever, right? You might be running some of those scans. The problem is one of the things that often happens is you don't have records that you actually ran it against what you expected to run. And that kind of is like the one of the things is that's one of the things that we saw with like the Sonar Cube, SolarWinds situation, right? Is we saw that it turned out you thought you were scanning what you were deploying, but you weren't, right? You were scanning something else and you were deploying this other thing, right? And that thing was signed, yada, yada. So this thing, because it keeps track of the hashes and everything else, and it's also integrated into stuff like in Toto, right? It makes it very, very easy for us to say that, yes, step A is downloading the code. Step B is linting, doing security linting. Step C is running the actual build. Step D is then doing some other scanning of the built artifact or the infrastructure or whatever, and then so on and so forth. And so you know that like A led to B, led to C, led to D, led to E, and you have a record of that, and you can go back to the hashes of what you were actually deploying out there, right? Like, hey, here's the bundle of Terraform code. It has a hash of ABC. Is that what I actually ran the tests on, right? If it wasn't, then I know something happened, which is something that we've seen we've seen happen a couple of times. Is folks think that they're looking at what they're expecting to look at, but they're not.
Yeah. So, but in general, we can anyway say that SLSA is also applicable to infrastructure as code as well, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So SLSA is really at this point like mostly recommended for anything that involves a transformation step or something that you want to keep track of. Because if you want to keep track of like different things that are happening and you want to have a record that like your build system signed off and said, I ran these steps. So you can't have just somebody say, falsify a record of that thing. That's where SLSA comes in.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments about what SLSA doesn't cover? And I tried to make this into bulleted items. I think it would be easier for the reader to quickly glance. So I put lifecycle of application security, which I think covers the whole SaaS, DaaS, and it covers the security framework. And these two are already here. And I put this as a comment to try to use the chart. It has a GitHub user content link. So do you have the actual link or the actual location of where that chart is referenced? Like if there's words around it, a README for it, etc., Mike, for this picture?
So this picture right now, at least, just comes from here, but I believe this is something that Isaac has been doing. So actually, it's also on the Google security blog.
Is it? Okay.
Let me go and.
Yeah, because if people want like more information about where this came from, the link currently doesn't give them much information, right?
Yeah, so
Okay, I
that
see.
helps out. I believe Isaac has, like, this originally stemmed from some demos I guess Isaac has been giving. Once again, I don't work at Google, so I don't know if he's been doing it internally, but my
Yeah.
understanding that this is all, this is stuff that they've been obviously sharing outside because they've made it public. But
Yeah.
they have some stuff in there, but I believe he has a bunch of additional, like, because I know in that I don't know if he shared the slides, but
He didn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I remember from his slide deck, he was going through and talking through each individual thing where,
He was.
the Trust Foundation is saying you need to have IAM and a signing mechanism and so on. And then you need to generate attestations, sign those attestations based on the trust and so on. And then, okay, then the aggregation and synthesis is saying, then you need to go and ingest all those attestations and try and figure out interesting information. And then finally, you use that information that you've aggregated and synthesized to build out policy, generate insights, and that kind of thing.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I think it's appropriate to just leave this, and then we could potentially have like a call to action part that says not follow up, but wait to hear more about the levels, and then eventually we can update the link with Isaac's blog, because I know he's been trying to work on that. Okay, are we good to go on to the next one, which is the problems it can catch? Thumbs up. I see smiles, except for Jason. And no pressure, Jason. Okay. Okay, so the use cases that we have so far is the local modification for for local testing of a YAML file, right? So developer configures or changes something in their YAML file locally, they forget about it, and they attempt to build the code according to how it was explained to us. I think it was earlier last week. It would prevent that bad compile, right? It would say, no, what you currently have on your system does not match the upstream. And so it would not compile the code or would not build the code. SLSA level 2, in theory, would prevent the build from even happening from a developer system, right? So it wouldn't even be possible, even if it thought everything was, kosher. Does this make sense as a use case to include?
So here we referring to basically the source code tampering part, right?
It's not necessarily tampering, right? It's more of a, it could be
Unauthorized
inadvertent,
access.
right?
Ah.
Somebody is just, they originally had everything synced with the upstream. Maybe they don't have a dedicated build infrastructure build environment, and so they're used to building on their local machine and maybe pushing it for whatever reason, and they're not trying to be malicious, but they make a local modification, right, and forget about it. So do we need to maybe make clarification that,
Yeah, I think for the most part, like the SLSA 1 is less focused. Like SLSA 1's trying to like build the on-ramp to security. It's not really itself very useful from the perspective of like actual security, but it does help in a couple of ways. One is assuming, right, like it doesn't really protect against a bad actor, but it does help from like the perspective of an investigation or audit, assuming your build system hasn't been compromised, right? Assuming that you are trusting all the internal parties, it helps you go back and audit and, find stuff like, oh, it turns out, this build happened on this day. Yeah, as Laura was messaging, right? Like it's stuff like, it's more like it just helps build an audit trail. It's just not necessarily a trusted audit trail, just an audit trail.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think some of these were for Laura and Jumpseed that weren't here in the past couple of meetings. there's these two links at the bottom, like all the way at the bottom, if you scroll, where we're getting some of this information. And it talked about, you know, documentation, mistake prevention, inventorying, and level 2 is reduced attack surface, weak tampering protection. And so it goes and it talks about the benefits. And so this is already on SLSA's GitHub, I think GitHub repo, and there's, I think this picture right here, I think is on the dev website, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember which is which. So that's where we're getting some of this stuff from, is these two pieces of information.
I'd say it also helps with like what they call the unwitting non-malicious threat, insider threat. So there's like, they probably don't go that down into the weeds when we talk about different threat actors, but there's I have some experience in like the developing an insider threat program, and there's that unwitting, you know, whether it be a developer or just an employee who thinks they're doing the right thing, but you know, they make a mistake. And so that's where that data processing error comment comes from, is that there's that piece is considered a threat actor, but not in the same sense that most folks immediately think of a malicious threat actor that's targeting that particular system.
So for the data processing error, outside of maybe a local modification for like a config file, or the other use case here was, you know, downloading additional packages onto your laptop, right? Maybe they were in the wrong directory, they downloaded the package into that same directory, not realizing. That's also another way to have packages in the build, right? What other processing error have you seen, Laura, or have you heard of?
Maybe the dependency packages, the vulnerable dependency packages, downloading and using it to build the application.
So would that be the downloading additional packages here on your local system?
Okay.
Yeah.
The program that
local. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. I was going to say mine was more from an information security standpoint, where it was like sending PII, you know, through an unsecure method was more of like the examples that I had from previous job, but it could definitely be applied here as you guys were talking about with the downloading packages.
Yeah, as you mentioned here in the local system, this is also applicable when we are building this with the cloud builder or Jenkins or something like that, right? That's sort as well. So we need to consider that as also to this. It can happen when we are doing this in tools like Jenkins or cloud builder.
I'd say I also have seen examples of like misnaming files, or and that, you know, it might look malicious or might be treated as malicious, but also conversely, you would be you're just making a mistake in how you name something, and then it has like a domino effect.
Files. Remind me, Jamsi, you mentioned Jenkins, the issue with Jenkins. So I
yeah,
can
what
capture
I'm
it
saying,
here.
like the dependency packages. So basically, this happened during the build, and this build, when we specify about the SLSA level 1, it can be our laptop. But when it moves to SLSA level 2, we are building this with tools like Jenkins or Cloud Build.
Oh, I see.
So same applicable when we are building in Cloud Build or in Jenkins or in any other build tools.
Okay, so instead of a developer making a local modification, are you saying that maybe an admin makes a local modification on Jenkins?
Yeah, it's usually on those scenarios, service account will be the, like, you know, the authorized identity to do this. So yeah, So with that
Okay.
access, still this can happen. Other could be, so some organization will have their own, to avoid security issues, they have their own local or internal dependency repositories, artifact registries internally maintained, and no packages, like for example npm or JSON packages and all will not be allowed to download from the internet during the build. So it will be only possible to utilize the internal artifact registry dependencies for building their applications. So in
That's
that area,
more advanced also. That's like Salsa 3, Salsa 4. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So
but this is a quite happening issue.
yeah.
Like when developers will not be linking to the proper internal repo, instead they will keep it open, then it will try to download it from internet. So in case there is an internet open in that build machine, then our artifact will become vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying there is stuff that, like, one of the, you know, a lot of the stuff there that Salsa sort of hits to help out these things are things like, hey, it doesn't necessarily prevent somebody from building against the wrong thing, but it provides a record that they did build against the wrong thing. So you can go back and have your policy that says, wait a second, you weren't supposed to do that. And then from there, right, you could have additional policies to prevent that, and it helps sort of do that. But the main thing, right, is it creates that record, which I think is really useful.
So then is the language, oh, sorry, Laura.
I was
Go
going to say that ties back up to that root cause analysis thing that I posted or attached as a comment before. That could also kind of loop back around into having a record of that and being able to do either debugging or an investigation with that type of information. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut.
No worries. I'm not looking up. I'm like deep in thought and just listening for a pause. In the GitHub or salsa.dev, it says prevents mistakes. So is this wording wrong? Will it not prevent it?
Well, so because level 1 requires you to have
A build script,
right? Like the idea, so what that prevents is if you just have something like make build, right? That's how you build.
Yep.
Well, that's a build script. Like if you do something like, oh, go build CP this file over here, and then like you're manually running all those commands to package up your application, then all it takes is somebody to fat finger something, and oops, I've now packaged up a debug version of the artifact, not the one I intended to. And so now there's like a debug version of the artifact that we're pushing to production. And like, this is literally a thing that, once again, like for a lot of folks, this is not an issue because they have reasonable CI/CD practices and whatever. But, you work at a large enough enterprise, and somebody, it turns out, like even at a massive bank, is building some critical application on their laptop and pushing it into production.
Okay. So then that kind of goes back to something I was doing earlier today, where I feel like we need a picture, right, of the dum-dums and what they're doing, right? And so I was like, oh, I was thinking of getting like a terminal, and like if this was a local modification, right, and you do build all.sh, it imports the YAML, it downloads dependencies, runs unit build complete, and then they go, push or something like that. We could then build the use cases around this to say, well, if you change the settings.yaml, if you misnamed the files, if you downloaded additional dependencies in that same directory structure, then based off of level 1, it should, in theory, prevent it from actually doing a build complete, should it not? Do I need to say it a different way? Because here's the build all.sh. Here's the build script, right? It's supposed to, you know, build the source, build from source rather. But you as a user have changed the YAML file on your local system. You might have downloaded additional dependencies on your local system. So from level 1 perspective, even though you have that build all.sh, would it actually finish the build? Is the assumption that it's supposed to check that yes, upstream is not correct, or it's not matching? Or are we saying, okay, yes, level 1, you have a build script, and even if you have all these other things that are changed, it's not necessarily going to catch that, but it would be an audit trail that this is where it went wrong. That goes back to that prevent.
Like, yeah, the use case, like for example, if I add a new file and then I fail to modify my build script to add that file during the build.
That one's an easy one.
Yeah.
The new file, right? But what if you new file? But what if you change the settings in the YAML file? Right? It's just going to import that YAML, right?
Yeah,
it's not going to prevent you. So that's where I'm wondering about that prevent. The prevent word is pretty strong.
Right. Yeah.
I would also want to
like
know.
Michael told, it's like it would be recording or only recording, like what all files that are there in the build instead of preventing it.
Go ahead, Laura.
I was just wondering, and this is a question from a non-technical developer perspective, but during that downloading dependencies, is there anything there that could be introduced that could not be prevented as part of that process? I probably worded that horribly, but just a question.
I'm not good with words, Laura, so I'm never going to judge.
Yeah, so I mean, I can talk a little bit about like what the concern is and like what we're trying to do with SLSA to kind of prevent it. And so the concern with a lot of this, right, is if let's say I'm running this locally, right, my local laptop, the worry is, hey, I have something malicious on my machine, or something like that, or me, who's just a developer, maybe messes with something while it's running, that kind of thing. Once you get to like level 2 and you're running it in like a build, or once you're required to run it in a build service, I can't remember if it's level 2 or level 3. I think it's level 2. Once you're required to run it in a build service, the idea is, hey, that build service, right? You should be, there's an expectation, and it's in the requirements that there's an expectation that you're securing this build service. We're not going to tell you exactly how you secure the build service, but we're expecting that you are securing this build service. You're not just letting, which is also a thing that I know breaks some of the Jenkins stuff is, hey, an admin on Jenkins could just log in and start messing with stuff. But the idea would be, you're securing that build service. And so the idea, once you get to like level 3, where even the build service is signing the provenance, then what ends up happening is the build itself is not signing the provenance. So even if the build reports false information, you have a separate service signing it. So you have the lower risk of, let's say, the downloading of dependencies. You downloaded a malicious dependency, and in certain languages like, certain ecosystems like NPM, even downloading a dependency can run arbitrary code. And so you can end up with a situation, right, where you downloaded a dependency that starts trying to steal your secrets. And if you are, if you're having your build itself, like if your build script calls something like sigstore or notary to sign the resulted artifact, then if you downloaded a bad dependency, that could go in and steal that secret, and now your signing secret is stolen. So that's one big worry. And so the idea is SLSA prevents these sorts of things by saying, well, no, the build service at level 3 is actually doing the signing, and is also introspecting. So even if a particular build is attempting to lie, you still know the inputs. So you could go back and rebuild it on a bunch of different hardware or whatever, a bunch of different build infrastructure, and double check, like, hey, I'm going to run it in a bunch of different places. And then it helps you figure out, was it the build environment that was compromised? Was it a dependency that was compromised? You could do a lot more there.
But level 1 says prevent. And that's
where does it say
one.
prevent again in this? Yeah,
it says it says benefits, prevents mistakes during the release process, such as building from a client with local modifications. And the explanation that was given by Mark, and I think he's changed this since. I'll have to go find the, I think it might be this right here. He made the, where'd it go? Build benefits, prevents mistakes during, such as building from a commit that is not present in the upstream repo. And he was talking about, you know, that you made a local modification on your system. I think he might have even.
Yeah, I think we hardened this in some of the, actually, no, I guess this is still there. But yeah, so I get, and so maybe this needs to be refined even a little bit further to make it a little bit clearer, but I believe the idea here is, like, if I were to open up my VS Code and modify some files, run go build, and yada yada, well, it's like, actually, did I really build off the git commit? Right? Like, it's hard to tell. Whereas SLSA will record all of that information. And so I think, I wonder if it's prevents mistakes during the release process versus identifies mistakes during the release process, such as building from a commit that is not present in the upstream repo, or if the expectation here is that the build process includes downloading the source, which, if that's the case, then the idea, and which either way we should make sure that it's clear, because that could also be the case, in which case, like, your build process is essentially, hey, I have a build.sh script or whatever that downloads the code, runs the build, and so on. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure what what's meant by that. And now that you kind of talked about, like, how you're reading it, and I think how you're reading it also makes sense. But it kind of complicates, I think, what we're trying to kind of get out of there.
So that's where and it looks like here reduces, it could be reduces mistakes, because here it said it generates and distributes attestation describing how it was built, who built it, what was the process command. So here it almost seems like, okay, it's just recording what's happening. And then here it says automatically verify that art exists and matches the expectation. So, and then here it says there's some sort of verification. So it almost looks like it is preventing, because it's assuming that your build script is doing that verification for you on your behalf. But that's a lot of assumptions that I'm reading between the lines kind of thing. Build command. Precise source version and build. So, okay, so we'll need to ask him if this is truly a prevents, that we are expecting that the build script would prevent such mistakes. Okay, so I'll take that back. Before it was about the language down here. Thanks, Laura. Oh, I just realized the time. I didn't notice that we were at time. Okay, before we go, any other thoughts?
Yeah, one point,
concerns?
not
Sure.
related to this document. I mean, since Michael also mentioned about that prevent word. So in the SLSA.dev site, the homepage itself, we were mentioning like prevent tampering and all those details. So instead, it would be like to say help to prevent, right? I mean, just the thought process. Or even
Yeah.
the very first definition of what is SLSA, we are actually mentioning like it is a security framework, a checklist of standards and controls to prevent tampering. So instead, can we say like standards and controls helps to prevent tampering, or
Yeah.
which will be like a little.
Yeah, I think that's something that even the IBM lawyers, before you write anything, they have like little
Yeah,
asterisks, like nothing can be totally secure and blah blah blah.
yeah, right. So what is SLSA definition? That's the first paragraph of the SLSA.dev. So there itself we need then this change immediately needs to.
Okay. Helps prevent and then clarify, prevent. Okay.
It's there in the 3 places in the homepage.
So, okay. Anything else before I end the call?
Yeah, good.
Okay, awesome. Well, if you want to add to this blog, feel free to add your thoughts. I'm gonna probably sit around for the next hour and try to wrap up as much as I can. But thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate your time. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.